Most people who have an entire hectare of land, 10,000 square meters, 40 times the size of the typical European apartment, still go to the supermarket every single week to buy food. That is insane. A hectare is more land than used to feed entire families for centuries without a single visit to a grocery store. The reason yours still doesn't do that has nothing to do with your soil, nothing to do with your climate, nothing to do with your budget, nothing to do with how much time you have after work. It is your layout. The way almost every smallholder farm is organized today in Europe and North America wastes space, doubles effort, and leaves enormous production holes where nothing grows and nothing is feeding you. Meanwhile, you're spending between $600 and $1,000 a month at the supermarket for food you could be producing yourself on the same land where right now you only have trimmed grass. But there is a layout strategy that changes all of this. A design in concentric zones that turns a single hectare into a food machine that produces 12 months a year. Vegetables, fruit, eggs, meat, honey, herbs, preserves. Every month, every season. The system I'm about to show you was used for centuries by European, Asian, and African peasants before industrial agriculture existed. It was erased from agricultural teaching by a specific European policy between 1962 and 1985. It was recovered by an Australian ecologist in 1978. And in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through the exact blueprint so you can map it onto your own property this weekend. If you have land and you're tired of being a customer of the food system, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell. We dig into the knowledge that makes you sovereign. Hobart, Tasmania, winter of 1974. An Australian ecologist named Bill Mollison is walking through the rainforests of southern Tasmania, documenting the accelerated collapse of native ecosystems. Mollison is not a romantic activist. He's a field biologist with decades of work at the Wildlife Service of Australia, at the Inland Fisheries Department of the government, and as a university instructor at the University of Tasmania. He has spent 20 years watching how modern industrial agriculture systematically destroys the soil, water, and biodiversity that it itself needs to exist. That night, after a particularly depressing day in the field, Mollison writes in his journal a sentence that is going to launch a global movement. Anything natural ecosystems do can be imitated by conscious human design to produce food without destroying the earth. For the next 4 years, together with one of his students, David Holmgren, Mollison travels the world, documenting something that agricultural universities had ignored for half a century. Traditional farms that had been producing food for hundreds of years without external inputs. In rural Japan, quarter-hectare farms feeding families of 6 for 15 consecutive generations. In the hills of Bali, rice and duck and fish systems functioning as a single organism since the 9th century. In the traditional farms of Sicily, before industrialization, 3 and 4 layers of vertical crops producing from the ground to the tallest olive trees. In the Andean mountain ranges, terrace farming systems designed by the Incas 500 years before the first tractor existed. And Mollison started to see the common pattern. All those systems on different continents, in opposite climates, in languages that had never communicated with each other, were built on the same architectural principle. Concentric zones organized by intensity of use. The crops that required daily attention went near the house, the animals in the intermediate ring, the perennial fruit trees and forage in the outer ring, and each zone fed the next one in a closed loop. In 1978, Mollison and Holmgren published the book that formalized what they had found. They called it Permaculture 1. The word was a contraction of permanent agriculture. Inside the book was a concrete, measurable, replicable concept they called zone design. And here is what almost nobody says out loud about what happened next. Mollison's book was published exactly in the middle of the most aggressive implementation period of the European Common Agricultural Policy. The CAP, originally approved in 1962, had entered its second expansive phase between 1972 and 1985. The so-called Mansholt Plan established explicit and documented objectives. European farms had to reach a minimum size between 80 and 100 hectares to receive aid. They had to specialize in monoculture, they had to modernize with machinery, and they had to abandon what the official Brussels documents literally called unproductive subsistence agriculture. In practical terms, the CAP dismantled the integrated family small farm model in Europe during exactly the 2 decades in which Mollison published his system. Between 1970 and 1990, the number of active family farms, smaller than 5 hectares in the European community, fell from approximately 6 million to less than 2 million. 3 out of every 4 small farms disappeared. Permaculture 1 was systematically labeled in European academic literature during the following 2 decades as unscientific, romantic, suitable for hobby, but not for serious production. In Spain, the Ministry of Agriculture did not formally recognize permaculture as a valid agricultural practice until 2019, 41 years after the publication of the book. But the numbers finally spoke louder than the policies. In 2018, an international team published in the Journal of Sustainable Agriculture an analysis of 52 permaculture farms established in Europe between 1990 and 2010, all smaller than 1.5 hectares. The conclusions were forceful. Farms designed in integrated zones reduced external spending on family food between 72 and 89% after the 3rd year of operation. Average reduction of $650 monthly per household, almost $8,000 a year. A year later, in 2019, Wageningen University in the Netherlands, one of the most respected agricultural institutions in the world, published a broader meta-analysis covering 132 farms in 11 European countries. The results were devastating. Farms designed according to Mollison's model produced between 180 and 270% more usable calories per square meter than equivalent conventional farms. They required between 70 and 90% less external inputs. And the data that probably most annoyed the editors of traditional agronomy journals. They showed consistent increases in soil organic matter, pollinator biodiversity, and water retention capacity after the 5th year. Better soils every year, not worse. I started applying this system on my own land a little over 3 years ago, and I'm not going to lie to you, the first year was chaotic. I planted the first apple trees before I was clear on where the chickens were going to go, and I had to move 2 trees the second winter. But by the 3rd fall, my monthly fruit and vegetable bill was 0. Literally 0. My 6 chickens stopped eating commercial feed almost entirely. They now live basically on scraps from the garden, fallen fruit from the food forest, and worms from the worm bin. And last fall, we harvested approximately 260 pounds of apples just from the first mature tree, enough to fill the entire pantry with compote and cider until March. Comment right now, what are you spending at the supermarket each month? I bet you're going to be shocked when you do the math. The science is no longer in dispute. The history is no longer in dispute. The question that remains is, how do you set this up concretely on your own land? And here is where the system becomes almost poetic, because it rests on a single rule of biological engineering that Mollison borrowed not from agriculture, but from animal physiology. The rule is this. Pay close attention to what follows. In any living system, energy is spent primarily on movement, not production. On movement. And unnecessary movement is the difference between an ecosystem that thrives and one that exhausts itself. Applied to your hectare, this means something very concrete and quantifiable. Every step you walk to tend a zone is energy that is not producing food. Every trip with the wheelbarrow carrying manure from one end of the land to the other is time and effort that could be dedicated to growth. Every kilogram of kitchen scraps that doesn't make it to the compost because it's too far from the kitchen is fertility lost forever. Zone design solves this mathematically. It organizes activities by frequency of visit. What you visit every day goes stuck to the house. What you visit once a week goes in the next ring. What you visit once a month goes in the outer ring. What you visit twice a year goes on the perimeter. Imagine for a moment that you walk barefoot through your own hectare before dawn next Sunday. The dew is still dense on the grass. The air smells of wet earth and fermented wood from the compost bin. 30 steps from your back door, you hear the first movement of the chickens waking up in their coop. And as you pass by the close garden, you tear off a leaf of lettuce to taste straight from the bed. That lettuce has not touched the refrigerator. It has not traveled in a truck. It has not seen plastic packaging. It grew 20 meters from where you're going to have breakfast. That dense, slightly bitter, almost sweet taste at the base. That is what your great-grandparents ate every morning, and what we have forgotten food can taste like. That is the difference between a designed farm and an improvised farm. It's not just economic efficiency, it's a completely different relationship with the ground beneath your feet. Mollison mapped this biological rule onto 7 concrete functional zones. And here's what matters, before we look at each zone from the inside. If you get the first 3 zones right, the system starts feeding you in less than 6 months. If you get the last 4 right, the system becomes practically immortal. It maintains itself, it multiplies itself, it produces more every year without you having to intervene. Hit the like button if you're ready to stop being a customer of the supermarket. It takes 1 second and helps this video reach people who have land but don't know what they have. Zone 1. The kitchen garden. Location. Within 30 meters of your back door, not 35, not 40, 30 maximum. Here is the fatal error that ruins this system for 70% of the people who try it. If you put the kitchen garden 50 meters away because there's more sun there, or because the ground is better there, you are not going to harvest the lettuce at their peak. You are going to postpone the visit. You are going to open the fridge and pull out the supermarket lettuce you bought on Tuesday. This is not laziness, it is human nature measured in multiple behavioral studies. Proximity is productivity. If your kitchen garden is more than 30 meters away, statistically, you're going to abandon it before the end of the year. In those 30 meters, you place raised beds dedicated to fast rotation crops. Lettuce, arugula, spinach, radish, scallion, basil, parsley, cherry tomatoes, small peppers, aromatic herbs. What you harvest daily or weekly. The secret of continuous production is staggered planting. You don't plant 1 row of lettuce in March and that's it. You plant 3 meters every 15 days from March to October. A well-managed bed of 4 feet by 16 feet produces between 175 and 220 pounds of fresh vegetables a year. On 1 hectare, you have space for 8 or 10 of these beds. Zone 2. The perennial food forest. Location: between 30 and 80 meters from the house. This is where food production goes into automatic mode for decades. A food forest is a layered planting system. On top, tall fruit trees: apple, pear, cherry, plum, fig. Below, medium fruit trees: pomegranate, quince, medlar. Below, arbusts of red fruits: raspberry, blackcurrant, blueberry, thornless blackberry. Below, productive ground covers: wild strawberry, mint, white clover. Each layer produces, and once established, 2 to 3 years, the food forest requires practically no maintenance. A single mature apple tree produces between 175 and 400 pounds of fruit per year. A pear tree gives between 150 and 300. A row of raspberry bushes produces between 8 and 20 pounds per plant per season. On a 1/4 hectare of food forest, you produce thousands of pounds of fruit and berries per year, forever. Zone 3. The chickens. Location: directly adjacent to the food forest and the composting system. Your chickens are not pets. They are workers. Their job is not just to lay eggs. Their job is pest control, soil scratching, fallen fruit processing, and manure production. 6 chickens on 1 hectare is the optimal point. That gives you between 4 and 6 eggs a day, approximately 1,500 eggs a year. At supermarket prices, between $600 and $800 annually that you stop spending. Use a closed coop with a deep bedding system. The straw or shaving bedding accumulates for months. The chickens turn it. It composts in place. Twice a year, you completely clean the coop and dump everything directly into the garden beds. And if you're about to make the classic beginner's mistake, letting the chickens free range across the whole property, I tell you from experience, they destroy the garden in 2 weeks. Closed coops with rotational access is the key. With these 3 zones functioning, you no longer buy vegetables or fruit or eggs. 3 lines eliminated from the supermarket receipt, but you're still buying meat, honey, and preserves. Zone 4. Rabbits and worms integrated. This is the zone that surprises most when you install it. Rabbits convert 4 pounds of feed into 1 pound of meat. That is the best conversion ratio of any common farm animal. Better than chickens, much better than pigs, radically better than cattle. A breeding trio produces between 40 and 60 pounds of meat per year in a space smaller than a garden shed. But here is where the magic of integration happens. Rabbit manure is cold manure. You don't have to compost it. It goes directly to the beds without burning the plants. And it's one of the richest natural fertilizers on the planet. Place a worm bin directly below the rabbit cages. The manure falls inside. The worms process it. You get humus and worm tea that supercharges your soil. The excess worms become protein feed for the chickens. The rabbits feed the worms. The worms feed the soil feeds the garden scraps feed the rabbits. You're not managing 4 separate systems. You're managing a single, integrated machine. Zone 5. The bee corridor. Location: along the border between the food forest and the main garden. Right on the flight route. 2 hives is the optimal amount for 1 hectare. A single hive produces between 28 and 60 pounds of honey a year. End of buying refined sugar. End of buying adulterated industrial honey. But the real value is not the honey, it is pollination. Peer-reviewed studies show that pollinated crops produce between 30 and 50% more fruit than non-pollinated ones. Your fruit trees and vegetables produce significantly more. Initial cost, between $350 and $600. Minimal annual maintenance. Secondary products, wax for candles, propolis for natural medicine, pollen as a nutritional supplement. It's a free pharmacy and candy store. Stop for a moment with me, because at this point, we've built something important, and it deserves to be named. What is happening between zones 1 and 5 is this. Every product of one zone is the input of another. The scraps feed the compost, the garden, the family and rabbits, the rabbits the worm bin, the soil, the garden and forest, the family and chickens, the chickens, the garden. The bees pollinate everything. That closed loop is the design. Zone 6. Preservation and storage. Location. A corner of your garage, basement, or a converted closet. Producing food all year means nothing if you can't store it correctly when it arrives in waves. You need 3 minimum systems. Jar preservation for fruits, vegetables, and sauces. Dehydration for herbs, dried fruits and meat. Cool cellar storage for potatoes, carrots, beets, onions, and winter squash. A basic pressure cooker for canning costs $100. A decent dehydrator costs $60. An improvised cellar can be built by burying a metal barrel for less than $30. Total initial investment, around $190. It lasts decades. Common error, trying to preserve everything fresh in the fridge. The fridge works for 3 or 4 days. For 6 months of winter, you need jar preserves and cool cellar. Without those two, you're drowning in zucchini in August and buying frozen vegetables in February. Zone 7. The forage perimeter. This is the zone that most small farm owners completely ignore, and it's the one that makes the system sustainable for decades without external inputs. Your outer perimeter, the edges of your hectare, should be planted with fast-growing, multi-purpose plants. Russian comfrey, Bocking 14, mulberry, elderberry, Italian alder, and if your climate allows it, moringa or black acacia. These plants fulfill 3 critical functions simultaneously. First, they produce biomass for mulch. Comfrey alone can be cut 4 or 5 times a year and thrown directly on the beds as potassium-rich mulch. That completely replaces nursery-bought mulch. Second, they produce animal feed. Comfrey leaves, mulberry fruits, acacia pods, all are high-protein food for chickens and rabbits. You're producing your own feed on land that would otherwise just be the fence line. Third, they act as windbreaks and visual barriers. They protect the inner zones from the wind that dries the crops and reduce moisture loss from the beds. This ring costs almost nothing to establish. Comfrey grows from root cuttings. Mulberry grows from stakes. You can plant the entire perimeter of a hectare for less than $40 in material. And once established, it keeps producing for decades without replanting. The 4 errors that destroy this system before it even begins. Before you finish this video thinking about which zone to set up first, you need to know the 4 errors that destroy the entire system before it produces a single harvest. I'm not talking about errors within one zone, I'm talking about structural errors that ruin the whole design. Error 1. Trying to set up all 7 zones in the first season. You're going to burn out by June, and you're going to abandon half. Start only with Zone 1 and Zone 3. When those two work on their own, add 1 new zone per season. Error 2. Planting the food forest without first mapping the shade and wind of your plot. An apple tree planted in the shade of a shed doesn't produce fruit in 5 years. Observe your land for a complete cycle before driving a single tree in. Error 3. Copying someone else's design without adapting it to your climate and orientation. A farm that works in the Pacific Northwest does not work the same in Arizona. The system is universal, but the species, planting dates, and hive orientation depend completely on where you are. Error 4. Forgetting about water before designing the zones. If your hectare has no rainwater catchment, own well, or direct irrigation access, the whole system collapses in the first dry summer. Water design, swales, ponds, tanks, goes before the chickens and before the trees. There is something profound in what Bill Mollison understood in that Tasmanian winter of 1974. He didn't invent anything. He didn't discover any new chemical principle. He didn't patent any technology. The only thing he did was observe how humans had lived in relation to the earth for 10,000 years before the tractor appeared. Put it in writing, give it a formal structure, and tell the industrial world. This worked. It still works. We have only forgotten that it works. That kind of knowledge, the one that doesn't invent anything but simply remembers what already worked before we decided we needed something complicated to replace it, is exactly the kind of knowledge that industrial civilization doesn't know how to value. It can't be patented. It can't be monopolized. It doesn't generate recurring income, but it does something no commercial product can match. It makes you stop being a customer. When your hectare is designed in 7 integrated zones, after the 3rd year, you stop caring what the supermarkets do. You stop caring about food inflation. You stop caring about the next chicken or egg price scandal. You stop worrying about supply chains that collapsed in 2020 and can collapse again at any moment for any reason you don't control. Your hectare is there. The chickens are laying, the rabbits are breeding, the bees are pollinating, the garden is producing, the forest is fruiting, the pantry is full. And your monthly food bill that last year exceeded $1,000 now doesn't pass $150. That is not savings. That is sovereignty. The question is simple. Which zone are you going to set up first? The kitchen garden stuck to the door?
The chicken coop?
A couple of apple trees to start the food forest? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. And above all, come back and leave me a second answer next year when you complete the first full winter feeding yourself from your own land. Subscribe to this channel. We share this kind of knowledge every week. And share this video with someone who has land but believes it's too small to feed themselves. Because it's not. It never was. They just needed the correct blueprint to unlock it. Mollison recovered it in 1978. Holmgren refined it. 51 countries have tested it in the field for almost half a century. And now you know it too. Your hectare is enough. It always was. You just needed the correct layout to unlock it.